Senator Klobuchar, if you have any evidence that I'm voting against this gentleman, and I say this gently because I'm worried about the NRA or losing points on the NRA, I'd like to hear it.
I have the evidence that we have not confirmed an ATF director during this entire last 2 decades, except for one, and I was directly told as I tried to get votes to get cloture by Republicans that they were concerned about how the NRA would rank.
But I'm asking about this Republican.
That is my evidence of what's
I'm asking
happened
about
here.
this Republican.
I can't get inside your brain or know your politics. I'm just saying in general, there is more evidence besides this one man about what's going on in our legislative efforts, what's going on in Congress, why we haven't been able to pass even common sense background checks when 90% of the American people support them. So I think this is much bigger than one guy. I just thought that point should be made.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And
Thank you.
by the way, even President Trump's nominee was too because of concerns by Republicans on the gun issue. So it just never ends.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we should turn the entire election over to a federal structure. I just don't agree.
Senator
with
Blunt, can we allow the witness to answer the question,
No,
please?
no.
No?
The witness,
No?
the witness did answer the question. The witness answered the question,
Okay, we'll
Secretary.
clarify it.
Senator,
We'll clarify it later.
Senator, the witness answered the question by saying the federal government often is in error in giving information to the states. That was the answer to the question.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just would like the record to reflect that after beginning his questions by saying that recusing the nominee of being partisan, Senator Cruz then embarked on asking the most partisan series of questions that we have heard to date in this room.
Thank you to all of you for being here. My state has the highest voter turnout in the country persistently, and we have elected Democratic governors, Republican governors, and Jesse Ventura. And I guess one of the things I've learned from that is what's most important is that people vote and they feel like they are part of the democracy. And what really concerns me about these efforts, which are blatant attempts to limit the freedom to vote, is they're literally messing around with the foundation of our country. So I guess I would start with you, Mr. Garza, because I met today with a number of the Texas legislators, along with Senator Warnock and Senator Merkley, because Senator Merkley and I lead the For the People bill. Which provisions of the legislation that is now being considered in Texas are you most concerned with?
It's a bad bill all the way around. There are prohibitions limiting the time frame for when people can vote. I think that's concerning. There was a misstatement made about how local elected officials are prohibited from sending ballots to voters. Actually, they're prohibited from sending applications for mail-in ballots. And there are, those actions are criminalized so that there are efforts then that intimidate local election officials from trying to help people vote, assist people in voting. And I think those are
and isn't it also the fact that if you have more than 3 people that you're taking to the polls, you have to sign some kind of statement or affidavit?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So there are restrictions on assisting voters to the polls and assisting voters at the polls. And so those things.
And also defining your disability. Is that there's something in there on that?
Yes. Yeah. And so additional affidavits that need to be filed by voters. I think all of the things that are included in the bill are things that have been tested and have increased voter participation. And so there is no evidence of voter fraud regarding these matters. There is evidence of increased voter participation. And those are the things that are being limited.
All right, thank you. Ms. Nelson, just along these lines, Sue, we've identified a lot of these issues. Georgia has passed a law that is kind of unbelievable in some of its provisions. How does the For the People Act? We know the John Lewis Act will help in one important way with identifying those policies and states that engage in discriminatory conduct, and going forward, which is one of the issues that would be forward-looking, they'd have to come before the Justice Department for approval. But the For the People Act is actually firmly grounded in the Constitution. It's a provision in the Constitution that has never been doubted that says that Congress can make and alter provisions governing federal elections. And that's one of the things that interests me so much about the bill. Could you talk about some of the important protections in this and how it would just simply create some basic national standards for voting instead of this mess, including how we count the ballots after, with some states, including some blue states, waiting and not even starting counting them until after the election's over, and then everyone's kept in suspense for weeks. Anyway, go ahead.
Sure. The For the People Act is a very comprehensive and expansive piece of legislation that equalizes voting across all of the states. Senator Cornyn made the point for me in many ways by pointing out that there's early voting in Texas and none in Connecticut. I think we've learned over the course of several decades that expanding opportunities for eligible Americans to vote only enhances our democracy. It only invites more people to exercise a fundamental constitutional right. And it's something that we should all be encouraging. The For the People Act does that by creating a baseline of 2 weeks of early voting across the country. It also creates a program of automatic voter registration so that only eligible Americans will be automatically registered. It takes the onus off of everyday Americans to have to register themselves. And unlike what Senator Cruz said earlier, it doesn't allow people who are not eligible to vote to be registered. It limits it only to those eligible Americans, which is a benefit for all Americans. It also includes same-day registration as well as online registration, and includes a number of other provisions, including welcoming returning citizens back into our electorate after they have served their time. These are all democracy expanding provisions that we now know 67% of voters support. Unlike much of the rhetoric we've heard today, the principles of the For the People Act are overwhelmingly supported by the American electorate. And that includes 56% of Republican voters, 68% of independent voters, and 77% of Democratic voters. This shows that this law is not a partisan issue. It's not partisan propaganda. It is an American issue, and it strengthens our democracy across the board.
Well, and I would note your point about people voting after they've completed their sentences, their prison sentences. Florida, while electing Republicans statewide, actually voted overwhelmingly, I think it was 65%, to allow people who had completed their prison sentences to vote. And so I think one of the points we want to make here, and that I made as chair of the Rules Committee, is that this you have just done. There is significant bipartisan support, as we saw during the pandemic, for people voting safely in the way that they would prefer. And that's the core of this bill. And that's why I know we will eventually be successful. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Lee.
Mr. Cuccinelli, you served as the Attorney General of the state of Virginia, both before...
Light on how Facebook time and time again has put profit over people. When their own research found that more than 13% of teen girls say that Instagram made their thoughts of suicide worse, what did they do? They proposed Instagram for Kids, which has now been put on pause because of public pressure. When they found out that their algorithms are fostering polarization, misinformation, and hate, that they allowed 99% of their violent content to remain unchecked on their platform, including lead up to the January 6th insurrection. What did they do? They now, as we know, Mark Zuckerberg's going sailing and saying no apologies. I think the time has come for action, and I think you are the catalyst for that action. You have said privacy legislation is not enough. I completely agree with you, but I think you know we have not done anything to update our privacy laws in this country, our federal privacy laws. Nothing, zilch, in any major way. Why? Because there are lobbyists around every single corner of this building that have been hired by the tech industry. We have done nothing when it comes to making the algorithms more transparent, allowing for the university research that you referred to. Why? Because Facebook and the other tech companies are throwing a bunch of money around this town and people are listening to them. We have done nothing significantly past, although we are on a bipartisan basis working in the antitrust subcommittee to get something done on consolidation, which you understand allows the dominant platforms to control all this, like the bullies in the neighborhood, buy out the companies that maybe could have competed with them and added the bells and whistles. So the time for action is now. So I'll start with something that I asked Facebook's head of safety when she testified before us last week. I asked her how they estimate the lifetime value of a user for kids who start using their products before they turn 13. She evaded the question and said, that's not the way we think about it. Is that right, or is it your experience that Facebook estimates and puts a value on how much money they get from users in general? I'll get to kids in a second. Is that a motivating force for them?
Based on what I saw in terms of allocation of integrity spending, so one of the things disclosed in the Wall Street Journal was that I believe it's like 87% of all the misinformation spending is spent on English, but only about like 9% of the users are English speakers. It seems that Facebook invests more in users who make them more money, even though the danger may not be evenly distributed based on profitability.
Does it make sense that having a younger person get hooked on social media at a young age makes them more profitable over the long term as they have a life ahead of them?
Facebook's internal documents talk about the importance of getting younger users, for example, tweens, onto Instagram, like Instagram Kids, because they need to have, they know that children bring their parents online and things like that. And so they understand the value of younger users for the long-term success of Facebook.
Facebook reported advertising revenue to be $51.58 per user last quarter in the US and Canada. When I asked Ms. Davis how much of that came from Instagram users under 18, she wouldn't say. Do you think that teens are profitable for their company?
I would assume so, based on advertising for things like television. You get much substantially higher advertising rates for customers who don't yet have preferences or habits. And so I'm sure they are some of the more profitable users on Facebook, but I do not work directly on that.
Another major issue that's come out of this, eating disorders. Studies have found that eating disorders actually have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness for women. And I led a bill on this with Senators Capito and Baldwin that we passed into law. And I'm concerned that this algorithms that they have pushes outrageous content, promoting anorexia and the like. I know it's personal to you. Do you think that their algorithms push some of this content to young girls?
Facebook knows that the engagement-based ranking, the way that they pick the content in Instagram for young users, for all users, amplifies preferences. And they have done something called a proactive incident response, where they take things that they've heard, for example, like, can you be led by the algorithms to anorexia content? And they have literally recreated that experiment themselves and confirmed, yes, this happens to people. So Facebook knows that they are leading young users to anorexia content.
Do you think they are deliberately designing their product to be addictive beyond even that content?
Facebook has a long history of having a successful and very effective growth division, where they take little tiny tweaks and they constantly are trying to optimize it to grow. Those kinds of stickiness could be construed as things that facilitate addiction.
Right. Last thing I'll ask is, we've seen this same kind of content in the political world. You brought up other countries and what's been happening there. On 60 Minutes, you said that Facebook implemented safeguards to reduce misinformation ahead of the 2020 election, but turned off those safeguards right after the election. And you know that the insurrection occurred January 6th. Do you think that Facebook turned off the safeguards because they were costing the company money, because it was reducing profits?
Facebook has been emphasizing a false choice. They've said the safeguards that were in place before the election implicated free speech. The choices that were happening on the platform were really about how reactive and twitchy was the platform, right? Like how viral was the platform. And Facebook changed those safety defaults in the run-up to the election because they knew they were dangerous. And because they wanted that growth back, they wanted the acceleration of the platform back after the election, they returned to their original defaults. And the fact that they had to break the glass on January 6th and turn them back on, I think that's deeply problematic.
Agree. Thank you very much for your bravery in coming forward.